sometime.
Yeah, I sure will.
Okay,
So how come
I
I
am now starting to live stream it. So this means it will be recorded
Okay.
from now on.
Sure
Okay.
will.
so I see more than just the opening screen right now, Hakan.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm starting to live stream it. Okay. So this means it will be okay. Hold on. So now do you only see
Yeah.
the slide? Okay. All right. I think I'm going to should I admit everyone in the uh, waiting room now?
Sure.
I mean, there is no rush, but if you are ready, we can admit them.
Okay.
Okay, I am admitting them now.
Okay.
So we can get started whenever you want, Denise. I will
Okay.
admit people as they come in from now on.
Okay. Welcome to the commemoration of International Women's Day, co-hosted by the Greater Lansing United Nations Association and Zonta International District 15. We are pleased to have several sponsors. In addition to Zonta District 15, we have the League of Women Voters of the Lansing area, Waverly High School Feminist Club, Lattice, and the Peace Education Center. My name is Denise Quarles. I will serve as the moderator for this session. And just a reminder that it is being recorded. We have a few requests for you. Please place any questions you may have in the Q&A. Again, in the Q&A, not in the chat. So questions in the Q&A, and they will be addressed after our speaker's presentation. At that time, you may unmute yourselves as needed. Also, we would like to know how many individuals are participating in this session. So if there is more than one person watching together at a site, please indicate the number of persons in the chat. So questions in the Q&A and number of persons in the chat if you are having more than one person watching from one site. I am the president of the Lansing chapter of the Greater Lansing United Nations Association. I've also been a member of Zonta for 26 years, during which time I have served in several elected offices, such as District 15 Governor and International Director. Prior to my retirement, for most of my career, I held executive positions in the Michigan Department of Corrections. I'd now like to introduce Sherry Johnson. As a 13-year member of the Zonta Club of Roscommon County in District 15, Sherry has served in a variety of roles, including secretary, board member, vice president, and president. She has also served as parliamentarian for District 15 and is the current District 15 governor. Sherry works as the CEO of MMI, a large nonprofit agency in Mount Pleasant serving people with disabilities. In addition to her employment and Zonta, Sherry is involved in other statewide and national advocacy activities to support inclusive opportunities for all. Sherry?
Hi, thank you, Denise. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for being with us tonight. I want to take just a minute to talk about Zonta International, our roots, our mission, and the impactful work that we do. Zonta was established over a century ago in Buffalo, New York, initially as a service club for professional women in leadership roles. Today, our organization comprises over 27,000 individuals, both women and men from diverse backgrounds, spread across 1,100 Zonta clubs in 60 countries. Our vision is to create a world where every woman can fulfill her potential. Zonta members are dedicated advocates for women's empowerment and the pursuit of gender equality. We firmly believe in the transformative power of women's voices and actively strive to foster an environment where they can thrive without limitations. Our focus spans a really broad spectrum of issues, including ending child marriage, combating human trafficking and violence against women, promoting education for women and girls, addressing gender disparities exacerbated by climate change, and being champions for leadership and gender equity. Zonta has a long-standing collaboration with the United Nations. The Zonta UN Committee collaborates with decision makers from UN agencies and countries where Zonta has funded projects or established clubs. Our current priority is aligning with Sustainable Development Goals with a concentrated effort on Goal 5 and areas related to women's empowerment. Next week, I have a great opportunity to be at the UN in New York for the Commission on the Status of Women, gaining insight and sharing ideas that are in line with Zonta's focus. By partnering with organizations like the UN and with UNICEF, Zonta effectively influences and positively impacts the lives of women and girls globally. I view Zonta not just as an organization, but as a movement that's striving to build a better world for women and girls. If you're interested in learning more about Zonta, we'll post a link at the end of the presentation, or you could reach out to me or to Denise. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. The Greater Lansing United Nations Association is one of 200 chapters of the UNA Association of the United States. And we have community chapters, which is what our group is called, as well as chapters at universities. And I would encourage you to look at our website, gluna.org, and get more information about our specific community chapter. Our mission is to inform the community about the United Nations, educate them, and to encourage them to support the United Nations. Now, International Women's Day is officially recognized by both the United Nations and Zonta as a day to celebrate the achievements of women, as well as to reflect on the challenges women face throughout the world. Our organizations also support the Sustainable Development Goals set by the member states of the United Nations. Excuse me. Goal 5, gender equality, is our focus this evening. Our speaker, Rebecca Goldman, will provide important information to us about the Equal Rights Amendment, its status, prospective impact, and advocacy efforts we can undertake to get the ERA implemented. Rebecca Goldman is a member of the Advocacy and Litigation Department. She oversees the majority of the League of Women Voters' U.S. federal advocacy efforts on the League's portfolio of social justice issues that impact people's ability to participate equitably in our democracy, including the Equal Rights Amendment. As part of her role, she develops strategies, tracks legislation, conducts policy analysis, and collaborates with stakeholders to advance the cause of gender equality. Ms. Goldman?
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am just going to pull up my screen here, and if I can get a thumbs up if we're back to the slide deck. Okay, awesome. Thank you. And bear with me because I'm just going to be going between a couple screens. Good evening. As Denise said, I'm Rebecca Goldman, pronoun she, her, and I'm the Justice Reform Legislative and Policy Manager with the League of Women Voters of the United States, or LWVUS. As Denise said, the mission of the League is to empower voters and defend democracy, and we work on social issues that impact people's ability to participate equitably in our democracy. This is a great example. I'm so delighted to be here with you today to talk about the United States Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA. International Women's Day is a very appropriate time to be having this conversation, so thank you to Greater Lansing United Nations Association, Zonta District 15, and all of the other sponsor organizations for making today's program happen. A couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, I am not an attorney. I serve as the subject and policy matter expert on the ERA for LWVUS, but if litigation-specific questions arise that I can't answer, I'm more than happy to take them to someone on our litigation team and circle back with you. Secondly, after today's event, I'll share the hyperlinks that you'll see come up throughout these slides so that you have access to the information and resources that I'm referencing throughout. And thirdly, I recognize that there are going to be folks on this call who've been fighting for the ERA for years, if not decades. Thank you for paving the way, as well as for your patience. If any of this is a review for you, just so that we can be sure that we have a shared understanding of the issue, consistent and accurate language to discuss it, and of course, a unified way to continue our advocacy. So as an overview of what we'll discuss today, first we'll go over the ERA text and why it's significant, the ERA's ratification history, the question of a time limit, the League and the Equal Rights Amendment, and some things that you can do. And we're going to start with a pop quiz. And if one of the moderators can help me by monitoring the chat, if you can pop in the chat, how many amendments are currently published in the US Constitution? And as those responses trickle in, if one of the moderators can just read them off to me. And it's okay if you don't know, take a stab at it and then we'll be sure to review.
So we have
No.
one comment that says 27,
Okay.
27, 22.
25 and 27,
Okay,
19 also.
wonderful. So this is everybody's within the ballpark. Some folks got it. It is 27 amendments currently published. And for the individual who said 19, the 19th amendment is what granted women, some women, the right to vote. So perhaps that's the association. How many amendments technically should be in the Constitution? If we can get another couple answers in the chat.
Seeing 30, unlimited, no limit, 28.
Perhaps I should have narrowed the question a little bit, but whoever said 28, ding, ding, ding. The Equal Rights Amendment has met all ratification requirements, which means at this point, it should be in the Constitution. Okay. So the ERA would amend the US Constitution to prohibit sex-based discrimination under federal and state law. This means that it would constitutionally protect the equality of rights under the law for all, regardless of sex. It's very brief and it has 3 sections. And as you can see on your screen, Section 1 reads, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Section 2 gives Congress enforcement power, and Section 3 says that the amendment takes effect 2 years after ratification. People may wonder why we still need the ERA in light of existing federal laws against different forms of sex-based discrimination, as well as the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. And this is an entirely legitimate question. However, the 14th Amendment has not been interpreted consistently to apply to sex in the same way it does to other characteristics like race. And this means that there's limited legal recourse for people who experience sex-based discrimination. As a result, women and other individuals continue to face discrimination on the basis of sex. This is clear in the ongoing fights against unequal pay, workplace harassment, pregnancy discrimination, domestic violence, limited access to comprehensive health care, and more. So what would the ERA do? It would raise the standard for judicial scrutiny of claims of sex-based discrimination by the federal or state governments. It would provide a legal defense against the rollback of women's rights, and this is of course becoming of increasing importance. And it would pave the way for additional legislative progress towards sex and gender equality. Now, bear with me because I know this might be a little boring, but the constitutional amendment process is established by Article 5 of the Constitution, and understanding it is really important to understanding the status of the ERA. So typically, Congress will file a joint resolution with a proposed amendment, which it has to pass with a 2/3 majority in both houses. The proposed amendment then goes to state legislatures, where 3/4 of the states, or currently 38 states, must ratify it. As Article 5 says, when an amendment meets that 3/4 state threshold, it's a valid part of the Constitution. And then the National Archivist, who heads the National Archives and Records Administration, certifies that the amendment is valid through a formal proclamation. So turning to the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA was written by Alice Paul and first introduced in Congress in 1923, more than 100 years ago. In 1972, Congress passed it with well over the necessary 2/3 vote. And in January 2020, Virginia became the 38th and final state to ratify it. As such, the ERA has met all ratification requirements. Okay, pop quiz. Has the state of Michigan ratified the Equal Rights Amendment? And that can just be a yes or no in the chat. And if as those answers trickle in, a moderator could read them off.
Yes, but several people have said yes.
That's 100% right. The state of Michigan ratified the ERA in 1972, the year that Congress passed the related resolution. But that doesn't mean our work is done, even in the state of Michigan. So why isn't the process complete? And here we get into a question of a time limit. When Congress passed the ERA in 1972, it included in the amendment preamble a 7-year time limit for states to ratify it. In 1978, Congress extended that time limit by 3 years. But in 1982, when the time limit came up, ratification of the ERA was still 3 states short. In 2017, Nevada ratified the amendment, And in 2018, Illinois ratified it, leaving it one state short. So at this point, the National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, contacted the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel, or OLC. The OLC provides guidance in response to requests from various executive branch agencies and the president. And they were asking for guidance on what the archivist should do in the event that a 38th state ratify it. In January 2020, the OLC did issue an opinion. It said that Congress had the constitutional authority to impose that ratification timeline when it did in the 70s, but may not revive a proposed amendment after the timeline has expired. So the office said that because 3/4 of the states didn't ratify the ERA before the timeline, the ERA is no longer pending before the states and could no longer be certified. And 2 days later, NARA released a statement saying that it deferred to that opinion, meaning that the archivist at the time would not certify Virginia's ratification that year unless it was otherwise directed by a court order. Fast forward to January 2022, 5 Congress members sent a letter to the OLC urging them to withdraw that 2020 opinion. Then the OLC issued a statement saying that it maintained its previous opinion, but that the opinion did not preclude the judicial branch from considering the constitutional status of the ERA or Congress from acting on ERA ratification. And shortly after, President Biden issued a statement calling on Congress to pass a resolution recognizing ERA ratification. So I know that's a lot of background, but I think it's really important to understand advocacy strategy, and we will revisit this when we get into discussing the League's advocacy strategy, because as you can see here, there are numerous government entities that have been engaged on this issue, including NARA, the OLC, the White House, and US Congress. Now let's take a look at the League and the ERA. The League has advocated for ERA ratification since it was passed by Congress in the 70s. Our work on the ERA is rooted in our equality of opportunity position, and that includes LWVUS supports equal rights for all under state and federal law, regardless of sex, race, color, gender, religion, national origin, age, sexual orientation, or disability. The League supports ratification and publication of the ERA. And in the interim, the League supports efforts to bring laws into compliance with the goals of the ERA. At LWVUS, we do a lot of our ERA advocacy work in coordination with the National ERA Coalition, and we're a proud member of the coalition's recently launched National Strategy Task Force. So the background that we covered helps contextualize why the League takes a multi-pronged approach to its ERA advocacy. Looking at just some of the high-level actions we've taken in the past few years and starting with the executive branch. In 2021, the League joined a letter to the Attorney General, who is head of the Department of Justice, urging him to direct the Office of Legal Counsel to withdraw their 2020 memo. In 2022, the League wrote to the White House asking the president to instruct the archivist to publish the Equal Rights Amendment. And recently, we sent a memo to the White House outlining priorities that the League would like to see addressed in tonight's State of the Union, which included the ERA. So if you're listening in at 9 o'clock tonight, keep an ear out for that. Now, turning to US Congress, remember both the OLC and the president have pointed to Congress for movement on the ERA. Also, when there was a question about the validity of the 27th Amendment, because it met ratification requirements more than 200 years after it was first introduced in Congress, Congress proposed and passed a resolution to declare it valid. So there's precedent of Congress acting to address these questions. And this brings us to a congressional opportunity on the ERA. Right now, there is a joint resolution in Congress that affirms that the ERA is a valid part of the Constitution and that addresses the question of a ratification time limit. In the Senate, it's SJ Res 4, and it was introduced by Senators Cardin and Murkowski, representing bipartisan support. The end of February 2023, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on the ERA and this resolution. And then the end of April 2023, Senator Schumer filed a motion for cloture, so that's to end debate on the resolution and to take it to a vote. Now, the Senate blocked this with a filibuster, with a final vote of 51 yeas and 47 nays. The yeses came from the Democratic caucus and Senators Murkowski and Collins, again, Murkowski being one of the lead co-sponsors. The noes came from the Republican caucus and Senator Schumer. Now, really important to understand, Senator Schumer voted yes and has been very supportive of the ERA, but then changed his vote to a no so that he could file what's known as a motion for reconsideration. And this means that this resolution can be reconsidered on the floor for a vote later in this Congress. The House version, which is identical, is HJ Res 25 and was introduced by Representative Presley and does have a bipartisan co-sponsor, but we're of course working to garner additional. The representative has since filed what's known as a discharge petition on it. And this means that if a majority of members, or 218 members, sign the petition, the legislation is removed from committee, helping push it to the floor for a vote. And so, as you can see, there are numerous ERA champions in Congress that are doing everything they can to use the various levers within their control to get this to a vote and to move the ERA forward. So again, looking at some high-level LWVUS actions now in Congress, upon the introduction of this resolution, we created and have maintained an action alert on our website, and that allows people to go on, input their name and address, and directly contact their Congress members urging support of this legislation. This has garnered more than 49,000 letters to Congress since February of last year. And what we're told by staffers on the Hill is that they do tally up the amount of correspondence they get on any given issue, and that can really impact a Congress member's decision about what to prioritize. So as a constituent, we really want to continue to put pressure on our elected officials. Then in February 2023, we submitted written testimony for that Senate hearing. In April 2023, in anticipation of the Senate vote, we sent a memo urging the senators to vote in support of the resolution. And we've also sent a memo to the House urging support of their resolution. And we're continuing to have meetings with members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to educate on the status and importance of the ERA. Just for background, there is a second joint resolution in Congress that affirms that the ERA has met all ratification requirements and suggests that the archivist has a statutory duty to certify and publish an amendment once it's met all ratification requirements. I'm not going to delve more into this here because it's not been as large an emphasis of the League's congressional work, but we are engaging with it when appropriate. Okay, so probably the reason that most of you are here, what can you do? As we know, change is incremental, and oftentimes passage of major bipartisan legislation requires its reintroduction in multiple Congresses. And this is why we need to keep showing up and helping demonstrate a track record of support for this vital issue. And a lot of change starts with public perception and public education, just as you're doing with today's event. In a similar vein, we can help further the movement by speaking about the ERA accurately and with a unified voice, including when we're discussing it with friends and family. I've often said even when we're discussing it with friends and family, but arguably these are some of the most important conversations we're going to be having because we are trusted messengers in our own communities. So I've pulled out some top-line bipartisan talking points, and you can see them on the screen. These include simply the ERA will constitutionally protect the equality of rights under the law regardless of sex. The ERA has met all ratification requirements, but has not been published. Women and others continue to face discrimination based on sex, and this is clear in ongoing fights against unequal pay, workplace harassment, pregnancy discrimination, domestic violence, and more. There's a resolution, SJ Res 4, HJ Res 25, that's bipartisan that would affirm the ERA is a valid part of the Constitution. And nearly 80% of Americans favor adding the ERA to the Constitution, according to a recent poll by Pew Research Center. Looking at the resources that LWVUS has to offer, you can share with your networks that action alert that I was telling you about before on the ERA. Again, it allows folks to easily contact their senators and representatives on this issue. And please share this piece. Consider adding to the letter why the ERA matters to you. Personalization is a very powerful tool when we're contacting our legislators, and we hear this again and again, that there's more impact if there's anecdotal evidence of why constituents want to see something change. You can also go to the bottom of the homepage on the League of Women Voters website and sign up for League emails on urgent issues, which include very regular content and calls to action on the ERA. Now, if you put your email into this system, it's going to go into the entirety of our email system, and you can unsubscribe at any time. And finally, if you have a smartphone, I'm sure you have enough apps, but you can download an app entitled League in Action. This is a digital community of advocates, which allows you to become an ERA champion in your community. Once again, because you're the most trusted messenger. There, we will share urgent updates, such as if the Senate takes this to the vote again, to a vote on the floor again, etc. We will also share ways to take action, such as sending an action alert to your elected officials or sending text to friends and family. And we already have language and content generated to make that really easy for you. At LWVUS, we will continue adapting and implementing our ERA advocacy strategy to use federal advocacy, provide public education, and leverage the power of our grassroots network, like we are here, to support the publication of the ERA once and for all. We need the Equal Rights Amendment, and our voices and efforts in this fight truly are what will ultimately get it published. We really look forward to continuing this vital work together. And with that, I would love to open up the floor to questions.
And my apologies, I don't know if everyone saw the note that our our Zoom system does not have a Q&A. So if you want to put your questions in the chat. And then Sherry and I will start choosing questions to ask the speaker.
While folks are typing, Rebecca, I have a question to kind of get us started. I'm wondering if you could share with us why you think this is still stuck, why it hasn't just already occurred.
Oh gosh, if I were in the business of predicting people's intentions and understanding all of the nuances of what's happening with the federal government, I would be a much more successful, much wealthier person. One of the concerns that folks raise very frequently about the Equal Rights Amendment, and I think this is probably slightly more of a recent dialogue, is related to the impact that it could have on abortion and reproductive choices. And I'm more than happy to start there. I don't know if this is a question that would come up, but it easily could, because like I said, it's something we discuss not infrequently. So first, I'll say that the League of Women Voters has a really long history of supporting the right of privacy of the individual to make reproductive choices. So that's where the League does its advocacy work when it comes to reproductive rights and access. However, when opposition to the ERA said ERA will codify the right to abortion, this is something that could easily come up in your networks as well. The truth is, we don't know exactly what the implementation of the ERA would look like. The ERA, as we said before, would raise the level of judicial scrutiny with which courts review claims that the federal or state governments are discriminating on the basis of sex. So we don't know how an individual court is going to rule in an individual case. What we do know is that we support the judicial branch having an additional tool at its disposal to ensure that folks aren't experiencing sex-based discrimination. So I would say most frequently when we get a singular talking point in opposition, right now it's coming down to reproductive rights.
Thank you.
One of the questions is there are a few states considering rescinding state ratification of the ERA. This hasn't happened before for an amendment. Is there any concern about that happening before this gets published?
That's a fabulous question and another common counter argument in opposition to the ERA. So thank you so much for bringing that up. There are 5 states that have put forth resolutions to try to rescind their ratification. You're right that rescission has not been accepted in the past, but this is not the first time that a state has said that they would like to rescind a ratification. They did that with the 14th Amendment and the 19th Amendment. In both cases, that was not recognized, and the states that said they wanted to rescind their ratification were actually published in the list of ratifying states. So what that suggests is there is precedent that once a state ratifies an amendment, that ratification is final. Additionally, there's language from NARA that suggests that the determinations made by the archivist are final. So there's also legal language to suggest that this would not be permitted.
Thank you. Another question in the chat says, it seems like there are a number of important issues that a high percentage of Americans are in favor of congressional action, like the 80% of Americans favoring the ERA. Why is that the case, and what might we do about it?
Okay, so I think the question is, why is that the case? Why is it the case that there seems to be so much agreement among the population on certain issues? Is that also how you'd interpret that question?
Yes, I think so.
I think when it comes down to it, we obviously are a diverse nation with a diversity of lived experiences and opinions and interests, but we often espouse very shared cultural values and a very shared idea of what it means to be a citizen of this country, which is equal opportunities and equality of liberties. The Equal Rights Amendment is a wonderful example where we're talking about the codification of equal protection under law, which is also a vital precursor to equality of opportunity. If you are experiencing discrimination based on your sex or your gender, you don't have equal opportunities in the workforce with regards to access to healthcare in our economy. So I think that it comes down to, despite diversity of opinions and lived experience, certain shared values that very much congregate around some of these social issues.
Wonderful, thank you. I know that you already mentioned the objections that might be connected to abortion. What are the other objections that you hear with regard to the ratification of this?
Most commonly, the objections come down to procedural, where folks say the OLC has already made a determination with the release of their memo that suggests that once the ratification timeline passed before all states ratified, the amendment could not continue. There's no precedent of a timeline expiring before all states ratified. There is precedent of timelines, and there is precedent of amendments being ratified a long time after they were initially proposed. Like I said, the 27th Amendment was published 203 years after introduction, but there's a multitude of nuances because there aren't that many constitutional amendments that make a lot of consideration of any particular amendment totally novel. So folks who oppose the enshrinement of sex equity into the Constitution are often pointing to procedural hurdles like this. And I'll say, no question is a silly question. This is a really nuanced issue. And like I said, a lot of nuance is often weaponized to try to preclude progress toward publication of the Equal Rights Amendment. So more than happy to reiterate anything we've discussed.
Another question in the chat says, would the ERA offer additional protections for the LGBTQ plus individuals?
That's an awesome question. We are very much of the persuasion that yes, the Equal Rights Amendment is going to have the greatest impact on communities that are most marginalized by systemic institutions of oppression. The protection of sex and gender does not just apply to women. It says no discrimination on the basis of sex and gender identity. So that should afford a really vital protection to the LGBTQIA plus community. I will say we are always cognizant when we're developing talking points to be sure that they're neither exclusionary nor too heavily politicized. So that was not a talking point that had come up on the screen, but it's certainly not something that we skirt away from. And a lot of the congressional leaders who are pushing forward with their resolutions speak most largely to that community as well.
Were there any particular concerns that you haven't already discussed that caused such a long delay from the 70s until we finally got enough states to ratify? Is there anything, any one or two issues that kept coming up?
Well, so admittedly, I know less about the opposition campaign than the campaign for support. We do have a really expansive blog on our website that came out the centennial. So if you go to the League of Women Voters and search Equal Rights Amendment, you can see that blog. And it does talk about a very socially successful opposition campaign that was launched in the 1900s. So that is probably your best resource.
Okay.
But like I said, the threshold for amending the Constitution is really high. It's the reason that we only have 27 published amendments right now. 2/3 of both chambers of Congress. We can barely get a simple majority in Congress right now to do anything. And 38 states. And 35 states did ratify it before the expiration of the timeline, or the timeline passing. And now 38 states have. So it's very evident of consensus in support of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Are there any other questions anyone has? Well, Ms. Goldman, thanks so much for the information. It's something that there's so much confusion about over the years, and and different reasons why states were not moving forward, and certainly good to see that some actions are still being taken, and that there's still some hope for moving ahead with this. And it's always been a surprise to me that for an amendment that was so simple in its language, that it was such a struggle, to get to this point.
Well, and Denise, simple in its language and its implication that the Constitution must protect all individuals equally. And I think some folks think that the ERA is no longer pending. I think some folks think that the ERA is in the Constitution. The only place in the Constitution where women are explicitly protected is the 19th Amendment, when they were given the right to vote because they were previously denied it. I saw a question come up about, are young folks activated on this issue, 100%. And admittedly, I wasn't in my teens and early 20s. And I think that particularly as we're seeing the repeal of fundamental rights that disproportionately impact women and LGBTQIA plus people, people are going, how can we have a rollback of something that we took for granted as a right in this country? And this is a really big reason, because we don't have sufficient federal and state protection. So yes, folks are activated, and the vote that the Senate took last year didn't overcome the filibuster, but more than a majority of senators, including bipartisan senators, voted in support of the ERA. And so we are making vital headway, and we just have to continue this drumbeat.
Rebecca, I'm sorry,
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead, Denise.
I was just going to say there are many comments in the chat that indicate that you have really explained it very well, and the best explanation that they've ever heard, and I agree with that. And you've really explained very much where we are, what we can do, and to actually talk about the amendment, like I said, which has had so many different comments made about it, and a lot of false information that's been out over the years. So thank you so much for expanding our knowledge and letting us know how we can advocate to move this forward.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
On behalf of both the Greater Lansing UN Association and Zonta District 15, thank you very much for your time and your attention to this topic. I did get a couple direct messages, one from someone who has heard a lot about the ERA over a number of years and said this is the best presentation she'd heard. It was clear and direct and very helpful. So thank you very much for your time.
And we'd like to also say thanks again to our sponsors, Zonta District 15, the League of Women Voters in the Lansing area, Waverly High Feminist Club, Lattice, and the Peace Education Center. Thank you so much. And we would also invite you to consider joining the Greater Lansing United Nations Association, or if you're from outside of Michigan, you can join a association chapter there, community organization. If you're in college, there may be a university chapter, a school chapter. Should point out that in Michigan, there's also a Detroit community chapter. So if you live in that area, that's a possibility in Michigan. Any last words, Sherry, that you might want to give?
No, I'm all set. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.